Welcome to this Photoshop crash course. My goal is to help you get started with Photoshop as quickly as possible, and that's what this crash course is here to do for you. By the end of it, you'll be able to create your own designs completely from scratch like these. When you first open up Photoshop, you'll see their welcome page. It's on the Home tab, which will include any recent projects that you've worked on, as well as any latest news or features that Photoshop has added up at the top. If you have never opened a Photoshop project or created one, you'll need to create a new file, which is up here on the top left. Here opens up a window where you have a number of preset options for different sizes, for example, for print or different photo sizes, different popular web sizes, or as you see as well, if you've created different projects in the past, recent sizes. You can also customize your size and shape of your canvas, the project that we're going to be working on over here. So if you want to create a square project, for example, a square image, you might want to create it 2000 by 2000 pixels. 300 resolution is a very high quality resolution that would be great for both print but also sharing online. And just a quick tip, if you find yourself creating projects with the same settings, you might want to save it as a preset by naming it and clicking to save that as a preset here. Once you're happy with your settings, just click Create, and that's going to open up Photoshop. Now, the layout of your screen should look something like this. If it doesn't, go up to the Window menu. Under Workspace, make sure you're on the Essentials workspace, and if it still doesn't look exactly like this, choose Reset Essentials. However, it should look like this when you open up Photoshop for the first time. We'll go over this layout and a little tour in just a minute, but in this next section, I want to talk about adding images to a project. There's several ways to add an image that you want to work with to a project, but the easiest is simply to find it in your documents and drag it onto this canvas. So here are some photos that you can get from the downloadable resources of this project. So simply choose one of these images. These are all copyright-free images that I found from unsplash.com. Thank you to the photographers for providing these images for our practice. And now you can see it is on our canvas. You'll also notice something over in the bottom right, which we'll talk about in more depth, the layer panel. It has added this as a layer. So you might be happy with where this was placed or the size of this image, but if not, you can take your mouse and you can hover over this bounding box, which is this box with these little squares, and you can resize. So if you take a corner in or out, you can resize it. If while you're doing this, you hold the Option key on a Mac, Alt on a PC. If I ever say Option on a Mac, it means it's Alt for a PC. It will scale from the center. You can do this with any of these parts of the image. Now, if you're trying to stretch or squeeze an image, you can press the Shift button, and that allows you to stretch or squeeze it. But I'm going to undo that, Control Z or Command Z on a Mac. To rotate an image, hover your mouse over one of the sides, and you can see how it changes to this little rotation icon, and you can rotate it. Holding Shift allows you to rotate it at specific points, 60 degrees, 45, 30, etc. And once you're happy with the positioning, which can always be changed later, just press the Return key on your keyboard and that sort of sets it in place. If I go back to my Finder and let's go ahead and choose one of these other images, you can see that I can drop this onto my canvas. I can resize it. Say we want this to fill up the whole project. We can do something like that, press Return to place it, but now it's on top of our other image. And over here on the layer panel, we can see that it is above our meditating image. To change the order, simply drag it down below. Now that you know how to open and start a project and place some images, let's go over the interface of Photoshop so you know a little bit where things might be. Now, there are so many tools in Photoshop and many that you might never ever use. There are going to be some tools and panels and things that you use on a day-to-day basis, like myself though. And we'll cover the most important ones. So in the middle, we have, this is our canvas. So this is where we're going to be working on our image. It's the size of the design that we created initially. This can also be changed later, but right now it's just that 2000 by 2000 pixel project, which we can see down here in the bottom left. On the left-hand side, we have all of these tools. These are different tools that allow us to do different things. Hovering over them will give us more detail about what they are. There's tools like text and shapes and clone stamping and selections, all kinds of good stuff we'll be going over later in this video. Up at the top, we have some different options that will change depending on what tool we have that we're using. Now, the one tool I want to mention right now is the Move tool. This is sort of your main tool. It's sort of just like your mouse that can click and grab and move things around. And it's the default tool that you'll want to go back to, because if you're in one of these other tools, then it might make an adjustment while you're clicking around. I have my file menu hidden up at the top, but if you see this at the top, you will find a lot of different options up here as well. Things like filter, the window that we saw earlier that allows us to open up all kinds of other panels and options if you want to adjust your screen depending on what types of things you do. Like if you're always doing photography or painting, you might want to choose a different workspace. But for now, we're going to leave it as the default. Moving around to the right-hand side, we have these panels on the right that we can adjust. So some of these we can make bigger or smaller depending on what we like to use or what we need in our view more prominently. For example, at the very bottom, we have the layers, and this is where I spend a lot of time adjusting layers, making adjustments to these layers, reordering them, and you have a lot of options down here at the bottom as well that will help us make our designs, create new layers as well. Trash layers, all kinds of good stuff down there. But back up at the top, we have our color picker, swatches, gradients, patterns. These are how we will choose colors for fonts and shapes and things like that. Below this, we have properties, which you can see if I change to a different layer, you can see the properties. I often actually don't really use this properties panel. So what I might do is just close this by right-clicking and choosing close that tab. But I do have this adjustments open now, and so that's how this works. We can also reorder these tabs if we want to by clicking and dragging. And the adjustments is how we can make different adjustments to layers, like changing the brightness or the curves or levels, and we'll go over that in the future. I also might just want to have my layers panel open by itself without these up here. And so having something like this might be a good default view for me. All of this can be adjusted. And the one other thing I'll mention about this interface for now is this little toolbar right here. This has things like the history, where we can jump back in time to a previous spot of our edit. We can also add things to this toolbar. For example, if we go up to window, we can add character. And now we have all the options for our text. So we can change things like font size, and you can open up these little windows with this button, which I think is super helpful. One last thing that I want to mention, which you might see that I have turned off right now, if I go up to window, look and see where a contextual taskbar is. This is a bar that is a recent Photoshop update. You can move it around, and depending on what you have selected, it will give you different options. It's contextual. And so for things like this photo of this lady meditating, there is an option for selecting the subject, removing the background. This is where we're going to be doing a lot of Gen AI stuff within our projects. And so if you don't see that, make sure you check window and contextual taskbar to turn that on or off. we'll be seeing how that works in the future. All right, so that's enough with the overview. In this next section, I want to talk more about the layer panel. So let me make this a little bit bigger so we can see more. You'll notice that we have this background layer that is automatically created whenever you create a new project. I can turn off the visibility of any layer by unchecking this eyeball, and we can see that the background is just this white layer. We don't necessarily need this, and to delete it, what you have to do is select it and press delete on your keyboard or the back arrow, or press the trash can over here. You can also see that this layer is locked. For this background layer, it means that if I unchecked that lock, which you can turn on again up here, I can now move this background around. And that's going to be the same with any sort of layer. So let me delete that layer right there. If I turn on this meditating layer and now I lock it, it means that I can't click and select it. See how I can't click and select it? And because my cloud layer is not visible, it's not allowing me to select it either. But with the clouds layer on now, I can select and move this around. So if you have a layer that you don't want to touch, you can lock it, or you could just turn off the visibility. We already learned about reordering layers, but another organization method is to group layers. Sometimes I end up with a project where I have dozens of layers, and it gets sort of daunting, sort of scrolling through and finding the right layer. So to organize layers, you can actually group them. So you can select multiple layers. You can group them with this little file group button down here. Undo that. We can also do that by selecting these layers or whichever layers you want and choosing new group from layers. Select OK. You can also rename it if you want. And now these layers are in this group. You can move layers out of a group, reorganize them in different groups, but it's just a way to keep your layer panel more organized. With the group or any of these layers, you can rename them. So you can just double click into the title or the text and then give it a new name. So sometimes instead of creating a brand new Photoshop project, if I am creating a series of social media graphics, for example, I might just put all of my designs into different groups in this one Photoshop project. I'm going to actually remove these layers by selecting them and taking them out of the group. The last thing for now is how to create a new layer. So if you click this little plus button, it creates this blank layer. Right now, there's nothing happening with this layer. If I turn off these other layers, you can see there's nothing happening. And if you ever see this checkerboard pattern, it means that there's nothing there. Right now, it's transparent. But there's lots of ways to add things to this layer that we'll see in the future. Another way we'll create a new layer is with certain tools like our shape tool here. If you select that tool and then we use it by clicking and dragging on our design, you'll notice that it creates a new layer. That was an ellipse or like a circular object. I'm going to delete that. You'll notice that under this tool, if I click and hover over it, there are other options. So under shape, we have rectangle. So if we wanted a rectangle instead of an ellipse, we have to choose that right tool. With many of these tools, if we click and hold, we'll see different options. So with the shape tool selected with the rectangle option, now I can click and create another rectangle and it appears here as a new shape, and I can again drag it down underneath this layer. Now creating that opened up this properties tab. I'm going to go ahead and close that again. I would want to go back to my move tool to move things around, because if I try to click and drag again, look what happens. It creates another shape. Once you're done creating shapes or new layers, you want to go back to the move tool, and from here we can then move this shape around again. And that's a bit more about our layer panel. In this next chapter, I want to talk about the contextual taskbar and the generative fill AI features of Photoshop. This has been updated over the past few years, and I'm sure it will continue to improve. You can see if I select the shape versus an image, the options change. You can see under shape, it has a lot of the same options that we would have if I had my shape tool open. So if you don't have the contextual taskbar open, know that you can get to some of these options for changing things like the color of my shape. So say I want to pick a different color. These are recently used colors, or you can open up these different folders or go to a custom color picker by going to this little box right there. This new color picker window will open, and then you can change the color completely to anything up here. Once I click OK, it's going to change the color of that layer. But now we have those options here. So same thing, we can get to our colors for that shape here rather than having to switch to the shape tool to get to them up on this taskbar up here. With the images, there's a lot of cool features like selecting our subject, which will automatically find the subjects in our image. And from there, we can do all sorts of things, such as copying and pasting to a new layer. So if I press Command C and then Command V, it will copy just that selection, that's what that's called, to a new layer. And if I turn off this background, we can see that, look at that, it removed that background. Or I'm going to delete that now. Similarly, with this same image layer selected, if I just click remove background, it automatically does that. And it does so by creating a layer mask. This is an advanced concept. It's a way of basically removing a part of an image, not forever. You'll be able to go back to it and edit it. You can add parts of the background if you want, or add the full background if you want. But that's what's created when you just create that background option. Now from here, we have some new options like generate background, which is a new feature where if you click on generate background, you can type in anything that you want. Peaceful bubbles in a cartoon sketch style. You have to come up with whatever prompt you want, and we're going to choose generate. And now it's going to create a background for this entire image based off of what the subject was. So now we have this Gen AI option that it created. Now I'm going to increase the size of this here so you can see the variations that it has created. You can also see that it says 1 of 3 here, and we can scroll through these different options and pick the one that we like. And then once you're happy with that, you can just click off of that layer and it becomes a new layer in our image. So just like that, we have this really cool design of our meditating lady on this sketched background on this yoga mat. Very, very cool. Now that was the process for when we remove the background. Let me go to our history and I'm going to back up before we remove the background. So that's how you can change the background of an image quickly. I'm going to remove this background again really quickly just to show you another option for using this contextual taskbar. And we have to use another tool to do this. The one that I'm going to do is the lasso tool. So if you click and hover over this, go to lasso tool. And what this does is it allows us to create a selection on our canvas. And then within that selection, we can generate any sort of image. For example, if I click and drag over here, this is where I want to generate sitting on a photorealistic puffy cloud. Generate. Prompt engineering, or how we write our prompts, is going to change a lot about the types of designs we create in terms of the styles. Is it photorealistic? Is it sketched? Is it moody? Is it bright? All kinds of things that you can play around with. And similarly, now we have these different options. Now, if we're not happy with these options, we can click generate again. And now maybe we've found one that looks a little bit more realistic, something like this. Now, if we like this one, but we want maybe something similar but different, you can hover over these three dots here and choose Generate Similar. And it will generate a few options similar to the one that it already created. So now we have these three additional options, and I actually like this first one kind of the best. And you'll notice that what it created is a new layer based off of the selection or the area we created with the lasso tool. And I can turn this on or off. And if I turn the rest of the layers on, you can see that it actually generated part of our lady that's sitting there, part of the background to match the color and what's going on in the background. I'm actually going to delete this rectangle because we don't need it now. Now you could just keep creating things and adding to the design with the lasso tool. There are other ways to create shapes like the marquee tool up here. And again, you can click and choose the right one. So if I select elliptical, I can go here and just say a bright sun. And so here we have some different options. And because I wasn't too specific with the style, it gave me one that was just an illustrated one. These look all right, but let's change this to a photo of a bright sun. And so now we have a couple more realistic views of what the sun would look like if you had taken a photo like this of this lady floating in the sky on a cloud. In this next section of the crash course, I want to go over some of the popular tools over here. You can also click this little arrow button to condense this tool menu up here, and it might be a little easier to see. I've also added our second image of our meditating dude over here. So the most popular tools that I personally use are the move tool, the title tool. So with the title tool, you can just select that tool, click onto your canvas, and it will create some just placement text. And then you can type in whatever you want, meditation. Now it uses the fonts and the style from my previous projects, and that's great if you want to use the style that you've used for your previous project. However, if I want to change this, I can highlight this text and I can go up here, or if you have your character panel over here, you can open that and you can choose a different font. So here, open up all your fonts, and if you just hover over a font, you can see a preview of it, what it would look like. If you know a specific font, you can type it in. For example, I use Fat Frank often for my projects, and so you can choose that. You have all sorts of different options for your fonts, such as the size, which you can also change by hovering over the size text here and clicking and dragging to the right or left. And that's the same with all of these options. For example, the tracking or the spacing between letters here, you can adjust that. If you want to get to your default, you can just select 0, which is the standard for any font. Below, we have options. Right now, it's all caps. And depending on the font or depending on what you typed in, I think I capitalized it when I typed it in, but now it is not all caps. Now that's one way to adjust text, but you can also use the move tool and select your text, move it around, and see how it has a bounding box around it. So here, and if you don't see that bounding box, make sure you have this show transformed controls up here. Now we can just adjust the size here with these transform tools. Right now, I can't go in and make adjustments to the characters though, unless I double click into this text, and I can make those adjustments once you're in that title tool. That's one of my favorite tools. The other is the shape tool. We already saw this, but I do want to just mention a couple quick things. So if you select the shape tool, before you create a shape, you can change the color, which is the fill. So that's the interior color of your shape. You can also add a stroke, which is the boundary or the edge. So right now we don't have a stroke, but let me just add a black stroke. And the pixel width I'm going to make bigger. We can adjust this later on. But now I'm just going to click and drag this over our text. And I'm going to put it underneath our meditation text. A couple cool things to note. One is we have this rounded corners option. So that's this little circle in the corner that we can now take in and quickly create rounded rectangles. Back here, we can change the stroke. So if we want to make it bigger or smaller, we can just actually hover over the stroke and click and drag right or left. Maybe I don't want a stroke at all. And with the fill, something more of a design theory thing that I often like to choose colors from within my photo to use for my shape, at least as inspiration. So to pick a specific color within my image, I'm going to go to my color picker here. And now if I hover over my image, I can see that my mouse turns into this eyedropper. And maybe I'll pick this sort of blue from his pants and click OK. And so now that image, that shape, sort of matches what's going on in the image, which is kind of nice. Now, after the fact, I can go in and I can adjust the size of this however I want. A quick tip, if you ever want to align two layers to each other, so I know that this text is somewhat aligned with this shape layer, but if I want it perfectly aligned, I can select these two layers by shift-clicking the two layers. If I go to my Move tool now, I can choose to align. So I can align them center vertically, center horizontally. You could also left justify both of them, bottom left justify if that's what you're going for. But generally for this kind of thing, I would want to center justify vertically and horizontally. You have a lot of controls up here for aligning layers if you have your layers multiple layers selected. Now that's the shape tool where you can create sort of typical standard shapes. There are some really cool ways to create custom shapes with the pen tool, but the one I want to mention is the curvature pen tool. So if I select that, now I'm going to change the color. This time I want to keep that color vibe, but make it a little bit brighter. So I'm just going to take that to the left in this color picker window. And now what I'm going to do with the pen tool is just start clicking. And you'll see that as I start to click, it creates this shape that is naturally curving around each point that I create. And then once I complete that shape by selecting the last one, it is now a complete shape. To move it around, I would want to go back to my Move tool, which is also a V on my keyboard shortcut. And so now we have this cool sort of shape that can create sort of a custom border around this image. Let me make this image bigger. So I'm going to just select it, Option, drag, go back to my shape. I'm going to duplicate this layer quickly by Option clicking it. Option clicking a layer and dragging it actually creates a duplicate layer. If I want to create another shape, I can go back to my pen tool. Maybe this time I want to have a different color, something that contrasts. Maybe we can start with his hair, and if that's like a nice sort of yellowy gold, we can maybe do that. And because I had that shape layer selected, it changed that shape.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like and subscribe to stay up to date on all of our latest videos.